Hello everyone. I want to start off with some reading, which I know is not that exciting, but I think it's important to understand why the Web Audio API even exists and what it is. Audio on the web has been fairly primitive up to this point, and until very recently has had to be delivered through plugins such as Flash and QuickTime. The introduction of the audio element in HTML5 is very important, allowing for basic streaming audio playback. But it is not powerful enough to handle more complex audio applications. For sophisticated web-based games or interactive applications, another solution is required. It is the goal of this specification to include the capabilities found in modern game audio engines, as well as some of the mixing, processing, and filtering tasks that are found in modern desktop audio production applications. So essentially we have Web Audio API because we want to be able to do cool stuff in the browser when it comes to audio, but we can't use plugins anymore like Flash and QuickTime for that, and HTML5, the audio element, is not good enough. So let's take a little bit of a closer look. When working with the Web Audio API, you have an audio context, and as you can see, I have two audio context examples here. The one on the left is very simple. It has a source node and a destination node, and the destination node is what you end up hearing, and the source node could be something like a synth or an audio file. In the example on the right, it's a little bit more complex. You have three sources routed through filter, distortion, panner. Then they are split up into a dry and wet signal. The wet signal is fed into a convolution reverb. The dry and wet signal are then brought back together into a dynamics compressor, and then finally to the destination, or what you end up hearing. So if I mention the audio context in this video, this is what I'm referring to. There are a lot of different libraries out there and resources that you can use to research Web Audio API. I actually find this page to be pretty good as far as the content it has. And if I just scroll down to the libraries section, you can see there are several libraries here. And the two that I am going to primarily be talking about in this video are Wad and Tuna, because Tuna is actually included in Wad. So let's take a look at Wad. This is my Wad project that I have created, and I have an index.html here that has a script tag that includes wad.min.js in it. And after that, I have another script tag that includes this synth.js file, which is where I'm doing all of my programming of Wad and playing around with Wad. So the simplest way to get started with Wad is to create a new Wad, pass in an object that has the source set to what you want to play. In this example, I'm just playing a simple sine tone, and I'm assigning it back to sine. And then I am later invoking the play method on sine, and what I should hear is a sine tone played when I load the page. So let's check that out. As you can hear or not hear, there was no sine tone played. And if I open up the developer console here, I have this message that the audio context was not allowed to start. It must be resume or created after a user gesture on the page. And if I click this link, then it takes me to this, and all it says is that the user needs to take an action that says that they want to play something. One thing to note is that this can be bypassed if you have the developer console open. So if I refresh the page right now, the tone will play, but that's only because the developer console is open. If I close this again and refresh the page, you won't hear anything. So just keep that in mind when you are working with the Web Audio API, that sometimes you want to have the developer console closed to ensure that you're hearing what the user will actually hear. Let's take a look at how we can fix this problem of the sound not playing unless the developer console is open. As it said, we have to resume the audio context before we can go ahead and play the sound. So what I'm going to do here is add something that you will not find in the documentation, but is something built into Wad. And that is, you can add a callback here. And the callback that I'm going to add is make button, which I put up here at the top. And all make button does is it appends a button to the app div, and the button resumes the audio context and then plays the sound. So if I save this and go back to the page, now I have a button here. The developer console is closed, and if I hit the button, you get that wonderful sine tone. It's important to note also that if I don't have this line here with resuming the audio context, simply adding a sound.play will not work. So no sound is played. I have all these other sounds here. I was just going to demonstrate a sine, a triangle, a square, and a sawtooth, but I'm actually not going to do that because it's kind of mind-numbing. Instead, I'm going to just talk about all the other arguments that you can pass into the new WAD. You can pass in things like volume, loop, rate, offset, pitch, detune, panning, an envelope, a filter, reverb, delay, vibrato, tremolo, and tuna. And if you're not aware, tuna is a sound effects library that's included in Wad.js. So let's go back and take a look at a different sound here, which I've added a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to add it, or kind of like gradually add it in just to show what it does. So here I've actually specified I want to play a square wave. I'm still making the button so I can trigger it, and then I have a pitch of D1. So if I refresh the page, I can... Lovely. Alright, so let's add an envelope to that, which essentially just shapes the volume of the signal over time. So now it's a little like shorter. I can add a filter here, refresh it. So now I'm getting something like a little bit more, I don't know, interesting, not as annoying. Gonna add a delay. It's almost like horror movie-esque. And here I'm getting to a reverb. And one thing you'll notice here is that you can't just load a reverb. You actually have to fetch it from a server. So keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons that I am actually running a server right now, is that I can send these impulse files to the client, which is also myself, and I can get reverb files and also sound files. Those are you need a server for both reverb impulses and sound files or audio files to be sent to the client. So get a pretty cool reverb sound there. And then I can start adding things like tuna and overdrive, wah-wah. So tuna includes wah-wah and overdrive here, and I can get some very interesting effects. And I'm going to lower the volume on this just because overdrive tends to get pretty loud. So much more interesting than the sign that we had earlier. One thing I did want to mention is that when you invoke the play method for a WAD you've created, you can specify different parameters. For example, the volume, if you want it to loop, offset, pitch, anything you see here. That's pretty much the extent of what I'm going to say about the play method, but just be aware that you can do this. Next, I want to touch on polywads, and polywads are, you can think of like a container that contains other wads or polywads. So in the example they have here, they are creating a sine, a square, and a triangle. Then they're creating a triple oscillator, which is a new wad.poly. Then they can add these wads that they have created earlier into the triple oscillator by using the add method. So they have triple oscillator.add sine, .add square, .add triangle. Then they can play it and set the volume and stop and use the methods that are similar to just having a regular wad. So as an example of something you might use a polywad for, I have created this script here, and you have a make wad function here and a make detuned wads function here. And so when I say const d equals make detuned wads -25 36.71, -25 is the detune parameter and the pitch is 36.71 hertz. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a new wad.poly, and then I'm going through and creating 5 different wads that have a different detuning and a different pitch. And then I'm making a button and I'm returning it. So D is a polywad, E is a polywad, F is a polywad. And with that, I can create almost like a piano roll. Let's talk about changing settings during playback. As you can see, there are several attributes that you can change during playback, like volume, pitch, detune, panning, reverb, and rate. And actually there's a couple more that are not discussed here, but I'm going to go over them in the next part. For this part of the tutorial, I have installed WAD with npm. So I'm using it here in Node. I have a React application. The complexity is a little bit, I guess, higher than what we've been discussing. I'm not going to go over React, but I will talk about what I have done here. And essentially, when the web page loads, I have 3 reverbs that I've pulled in from, that I'm going to pull in from the server here. And all of these reverb impulses I got from this website here if you're interested. The reverbs I store in an array here. I have mixed sounds, which are the same names as files that I am going to fetch from the server. If you remember, I have to fetch both of these from the server to be able to use them in my project. Now, I've just decided that reverb 3 sounds the best with synth 3, and reverb 2 sounds the best with percussion, and reverb 1 sounds the best with bass. So that's why I have them here in reverse order. In the mix, I've called make mix, which I've imported up here, and make mix is this function over here, which takes in the mix sounds and the reverbs, and it creates a wad.poly. And the wad.poly applies this compressor here. And compression is a difficult subject to understand, especially if you're new to audio or audio production. So I won't discuss it here. It definitely would require an entire video dedicated to it. But this compressor is applied to the wad.poly as a whole after all of these wads that I'm creating down here have been added to it. So for each of these mixed sounds, I am going through them and creating a new wad. and I have specified an envelope, a reverb, a delay for each of these WADs. And after the WADs have been created, I add them to the mix, which is a wad.poly. The wad.poly is then returned here, and essentially from here I end up going through and I'm going to play around with the sounds and see what I can do. So here's what the application looks like. It's very basic. I have the synth, the percussion, and the bass. And what we were talking about before the last part was how these WADs have methods that you can call that allow you to change things about the sound as the sound is playing. And all of these methods are on the prototype. So if you take a look here, you can see there is play, which we've already used extensively, stop to stop the sound. You can set the delay, and the delay takes in 3 different arguments here, which I have down here. And then you can set the detuning, which I do not have here. You can set the panning, which I do have, and then I also have reverb here. But there are several other parameters that you can set on the fly as the sound is playing. So let's start by just playing the mix as a whole. The timing is slightly off, but that's more to do with the loops that I chose, not actually WAD. You can hear that ringing out, obviously the delay and reverb causing that. So that was kind of cool. The delay time actually shows as being 0 here, but it's actually so short that it kind of gives it like a ring modulation effect, which is kind of cool. You could definitely use this for sound design. We're at the end of the video here, and I hope that this was at least mildly useful for you, either covering Web Audio API or Wad.js, and how you can use Wad.js, or maybe give you some ideas for, what Web Audio API is capable of. So thank you for watching, and that's all I got.